Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most closely watched, carefully silenced, and genuinely dangerous intersections in American history. The documented and rumored world where Marilyn Monroe, the Kennedy brothers, the FBI, and the Chicago mob all ended up in the same rooms, at the same parties, sharing the same doctors, and occasionally the same secrets. Not the tabloid version, not the breathless biopic version. The real one. The version where the most photographed woman in America moves through a world of enormous power and almost no protection, and everyone around her is quietly keeping notes. If this is the kind of midnight history you keep coming back to, the kind where glamour and surveillance and genuine tragedy are somehow all the same story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And a real thank you to the listener who sent this topic in. Genuinely good call. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, and what the clock says where you are. And while you're at it, whether you've ever worn something so tight another person had to sew you into it. No judgment. It was a different era. Dim the lights, switch on a fan for some soft white noise, settle in, and draw the covers up to your chin, and maybe don't wear anything with 2,500 hand-stitched rhinestones to bed tonight, just to be safe. Have you ever stopped to picture being the most surveilled woman in a country that publicly adored you? How do you become the person everyone in a room is watching, while also being the person no one will officially acknowledge knowing? Did the FBI file on you exist before or after you started asking questions? What exactly is a doctor whose nickname is Dr. Feelgood putting in that needle, and why is it also on Air Force One? The diary, the small red one, what was actually in it, and where did it go? Could you survive being simultaneously fired, monitored, mourned in advance, and sung to sleep by your own legend? And how do you end up, at the end of all of it, with an estate worth less than a mid-range car? Congratulations. You've just woken up in Los Angeles, 1954, and your name, for now, is Norma Jean, though almost no one calls you that anymore. The tile is cold under your feet, the room smells like powder and someone else's ambition. Outside, the studio has opinions about what you eat for breakfast, and J. Edgar Hoover has already started a file. Good luck. You wake up as Norma Jean, and you have about 90 minutes to become Marilyn before anyone is allowed to see you. This is not a figure of speech. Marilyn is a job, and the job begins at the vanity with the bulbs on, where you assemble a face the whole country believes you are simply born with. The hair, the lashes, the specific breathy tilt of the voice, none of it shows up on its own. You build it every morning, in order, the same way you'd build anything you intended to sell. The year is somewhere in the late 1950s, and you're living at 444 East 57th Street in Manhattan, which sounds glamorous until you consider that glamour requires you to be awake before the city is fully operational. The apartment smells faintly of cold cream and Dom Perignon, and yes, the Dom Perignon is sometimes from breakfast. The bottle doesn't judge. The bottle is, in fact, the least judgmental thing in the room. Let's talk about the hair. It takes 40 minutes minimum. The platinum is not your natural colour, which you are aware of, and which your colourist is aware of, and which the entire country would be aware of if the entire country had ever seen a photograph taken before 10 a metre. The bleaching process has the structural ambitions of a civil engineering project. You maintain it the way a city maintains a bridge, constant, expensive, and slightly dangerous to stop. Meanwhile, there's the voice. The breathy whisper that sounds like an accident is not an accident. It's a studied, practiced calibration you've been refining since the mid-1940s, when you understood that a woman who sounds a little unclear gets listened to more carefully. Men lean in. They assume she needs help. She does not need help. She has memorized everything in the room already. This is where Eunice Murray comes in. Eunice was placed in your Brentwood home in early 1962 by Dr. Ralph Greenson, your psychiatrist, who was concerned about you being alone. Eunice makes sure the house runs. She is steady and quiet and carries a mop with the authority of someone who has simply decided the floor will be clean and that's the end of it. You find her calming the way you find the small tile fountain in the courtyard calming. Not warm, exactly, but reliable. Reliable is underrated. The Brentwood house itself is at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive, which you bought in January 1962 for $75,000 and immediately began filling with Mexican tiles, hauled back from a Tijuana sourcing trip you took with more enthusiasm than most people apply to buying a house. There's a mosaic at the entrance. The tiles are terracotta and cream, and they make a specific sound under bare feet in the morning that you like. The house smells like those tiles. It smells like someone made a decision about what kind of life they intended to have and then drove to Mexico to confirm it. Of course, the other smell, the one that will matter later, that will be noted in police reports, is the sharp, bitter chemical odor of chloral hydrate. That's the sleeping medication. That's for the insomnia, which is its own separate job. The one you work after Marilyn has been put away for the evening, and Norma Jean is left sitting in the white bedroom with the white linen curtains and the specific quiet of a very famous person who can't sleep. The medicine cabinet holds bottles from at least 3 different prescribing physicians, who are apparently operating under the assumption that the other 2 don't exist. The cabinet doesn't comment on this arrangement. It just holds the bottles with the orderly patience of a filing system that knows exactly how much it knows. You play Frank Sinatra records in the evenings. Not because of who Frank is, and Frank is quite a lot of things, several of which will become relevant shortly, but because the music is familiar, and familiar is what the evenings need. You make Mexican hot chocolate on cool mornings and take long baths that run well past the point of practicality. These are not indulgences, they're maintenance. Marilyn requires a great deal of maintenance, and Norma Jean is the only one doing it. You sign with 20th Century Fox, and for the length of the contract the studio decides who you are, not in a vague spiritual sense, in a literal one. They decide the name on the marquee, the colour of your hair, the films you make, and the films you are forbidden to make. You are an asset on a balance sheet that happens to have a pulse. The contract runs for years, and somewhere in the fine print is the part where you discover what you actually agreed to. Norma Jean Mortensen becomes Marilyn Monroe somewhere around 1946, the year Fox puts her under contract for the first time. The name isn't chosen by you. It's assembled from pieces the studio considered marketable, your mother's maiden name, a compliant vowel arrangement, something that sounds like it should already be on a marquee. You don't object, because you're 20 years old and someone is offering to make you famous, which in 1946 seems like a reasonable trade for a surname. The contract has a morality clause. Most contracts do, in this era. The morality clause is basically a trapdoor. You can't see it from above, but the studio can open it whenever the optics require. A photograph, a rumour, a marriage the publicity department didn't pre-approve. Trapdoors don't warn you. Let's talk about the hair. It starts dark. By the early 1950s it is platinum, bleached on a schedule that would make a swimming pool chlorine level look modest. The upkeep is relentless, the kind of relentless that means you sit in a chair for hours every few weeks while someone applies chemistry to your scalp and you breathe the smell of it and pretend this is glamorous. A colorist named Pearl has opinions about the exact shade. Pearl does not ask yours. By 1952, you are the most photographed woman in America. This is not an informal title. The photographers have a consensus. Arrived at commercially, you have appeared on 33 magazine covers in 2 years. The studio is pleased. The studio expresses pleasure the way institutions do, by asking for more and adding clauses. The clause about approving your own publicity photos is denied. The clause about script approval takes years to negotiate. The clause you eventually win, around 1955, costs you the better part of your mental health to obtain, which is not something the clause mentions. You form Marilyn Monroe Productions in 1955, partly as a negotiating position and partly as an act of genuine defiance. The studio responds the way studios respond, which is to say, slowly, grudgingly, and with a new contract that gives you slightly more of what you wanted, while retaining exactly enough control to remind everyone who owns the infrastructure. Milton Green, a photographer, is your business partner. He wears good suits and has a calm manner that studios find harder to dismiss than a woman asking for the same things alone. By 1962, the détente is over. You are filming Something's Got to Give, a movie that is not going well. You call in sick with a frequency the studio's accountants find alarming, though your physician, one of them anyway, provides documentation each time. In May, you fly to New York. You have a prior engagement. 15,000 people are waiting for you at Madison Square Garden. The studio sends a memo. The memo uses the word unacceptable. The memo has a point, in the narrow contractual sense, though it fails to anticipate how thoroughly that evening will make the memo irrelevant to history. Fox fires you in June 1962. The official language cites willful violation of contract. The unofficial reasons include the birthday gala, the absences, and the general sense that she had become too expensive to manage and too famous to quietly discipline. They are firing the biggest female box office draw of the decade for showing up to a birthday party. The irony doesn't appear in the studio's paperwork. Paperwork rarely has a sense of irony. It just has columns, and in the column marked Asset, someone has written a different name. You are late. You are always late, and everyone in your life has built their schedule around the certainty of it. The car is ready at noon, and you are not in it. The set is lit at 9, and you arrive at 1. If you arrive. People call it a flaw, a symptom, a power move, depending on how much they like you that week. What it actually is, most mornings, is the long arithmetic of getting out of bed when getting out of bed is the hardest thing you do all day. Mornings begin in white. The bedroom at 12305. Fifth Helena Drive is white. White walls, white linen curtains, white pillows arranged in the approximate shape of a life that is going fine. The house smells like Mexican tiles you hauled back from Tijuana in early 1962, earthy, mineral, and faintly cooler than the air around them, like something that has survived longer than it was supposed to. There's a tile fountain in the courtyard that makes a sound your nervous system finds acceptable. You have few things that fall into that category. The cabinet's mismatched bottles do not volunteer their provenance, but you know it the way you know most things about the infrastructure of your own days, quietly, and without making it a conversation. Chloral hydrate for sleep. Something else for the anxiety underneath the sleep. Something else for the morning. When the night's arithmetic hasn't quite cleared, the cabinet doesn't judge. It just waits, fully stocked, the most reliable thing in the room. Eunice Murray is somewhere in the house. Doctor. Ralph Greenson placed her there because he was worried about you being alone, which is a reasonable thing to worry about, and also means you are never technically alone, which is a different problem. Eunice moves through the house with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been specifically hired not to be noticed. She notices everything. She reports some of it. The house has opinions about this arrangement. They are expressed through floorboards. This is where Frank Sinatra records enter the evening. Not as event, not as mood setting, just as atmosphere, the way some apartments have traffic noise. You play them because the sound fills space that would otherwise fill itself with other things, and you are not always interested in what other things would choose. Dom Perignon, sometimes at breakfast, not as indulgence, exactly, but as a kind of pharmacological argument that the day is already in progress and you might as well be in it. Now, the lateness. The lateness is not laziness. The lateness is each small preparation taking longer than it should because your hands are not entirely cooperating and your nervous system has a different idea about the schedule than your calendar does. A makeup call that should take 40 minutes takes 2 hours because somewhere in the middle of the second hour you lose the thread of why you're doing it. Your dresser, a woman named Marjorie who has the patient effect of a very experienced air traffic controller, retrieves the thread. She hands it back without comment. This is Marjorie's entire skill set, and it is formidable. The studio accountants, back at Fox, have a file. The file documents every late arrival, every missed shoot day, every hour of crew time billed against your name. What the file doesn't document is what a late arrival costs when you're the one arriving. The specific weight of knowing that 15 people are waiting, and that the waiting is, technically, your fault, and that your body still won't move faster. The file doesn't have a column for that. Of course, there is the May 19th problem. Madison Square Garden, 15,000 people. Peter Lawford standing at the microphone with the easy confidence of a man who has never once been sewn into his clothing, saying, "The late Marilyn Monroe" into a live sound system, and the crowd laughing, because she isn't there yet, and then she is, emerging from backstage in a dress with 2,500 rhinestones, hand-stitched to fabric, so close to your skin it required 2 people to get you in, and will require 2 more to get you out. The gown doesn't move. You move inside it, carefully, the way you'd move inside a very expensive opinion. You sing. The lateness, for 4 minutes, doesn't exist. You go to a party at a Hollywood agent's house in the spring of 1954, and this is how it works in your world. Powerful men are not introduced to you, they are arranged near you. You are still married to a baseball player at this point, which makes the room slightly more careful, but not much. A senator from Massachusetts is there. charming and rising and very aware of where the cameras are. You shake the hand, you make the small talk. The room files it away for later, because the room files everything away for later. The agent's name is Charles Feldman, and his parties are a kind of infrastructure. Hollywood money on one side, Washington ambition on the other, and somewhere in the middle a man named Peter Lawford, who is an actor by credential and a social switchboard by profession. Lawford married a Kennedy sister that same year. He now exists at the exact intersection of these two worlds, which sounds glamorous, and is in fact exhaustive weather. Being a door can be exhausting. You go through him to get anywhere. Everyone does. These meetings happen at a specific address. Frank Sinatra keeps a compound out in Palm Springs at 1600 North Wonder Palms Road, a private campus where Hollywood, the mob, and whoever the White House sends this week all circulate in the same rooms, which is basically a WeWork for people who could have each other killed. Sinatra is the connective tissue here. He knows everyone. More precisely, everyone needs something from him, and he has arranged his property accordingly. Guest bungalows, a pool, a bar that understands discretion the way a priest understands it, quiet, patient, and professionally forgetful. What gets said in the desert stays in the desert. That is not a rule anyone has written down. It doesn't need to be. The senator doesn't become the president until January 1961, but you've crossed paths in the years between. The more sustained thing, the thing people are still arguing about in libraries, begins around 1960, when he's running and the country is paying an extraordinary amount of attention to what he does next. You are living at 444 East 57th Street in New York by then. The campaign is happening. The rooms are getting more crowded and more careful simultaneously. Meanwhile, a man named Sam Giancana is also in some of these rooms, which requires a small detour. Giancana runs Chicago. Robert Kennedy's Justice Department is actively trying to put him in prison. The CIA has simultaneously hired him to kill Fidel Castro under a program called Operation Mongoose. So at this particular moment in American history, the Attorney General is prosecuting a man the government is also paying. Giancana does not appear bothered by this. The two institutions apparently haven't met each other yet. A woman named Judith Campbell Exner moves through this same circle. She says she carried envelopes between the president and Giancana in 1960 and 1961. She says she was their mutual acquaintance, their shared girlfriend, their courier. The envelopes contained what the envelopes contained. Nobody has opened them since. Somewhere in the overlap between a sitting president, a Chicago mob boss, and a woman carrying sealed envelopes across the country, there is a story the 1960s press has unanimously agreed not to tell. Ben Bradley knows. Hugh Sidey at Time knows. The group chat has the screenshots. Nobody forwards them. A junior FBI agent, the kind who would later write nothing and file everything, pauses in the corridor of the Mayflower Hotel in 1961, adjusts his hat brim with 2 fingers, and keeps walking. He is not the story. He is the infrastructure of the story. J. Edgar Hoover is the story. Hoover has been director since 1924 and will be director until he dies in 1972 because he keeps a file on everyone and uses it not to arrest people but to remind them what he knows. Monroe's file runs to hundreds of pages. It is partially declassified. The part that isn't is, presumably, the interesting part. The senator thinks he's managing the evening. Sinatra thinks he's running the compound. Lawford thinks his access is the valuable thing. Hoover thinks the files are the leverage. And you stood in Charles Feldman's living room in the spring of 1954, shook a hand, made the small talk, and let the room do what it does. The room filed it away. It's still filing. You learn quickly that nothing in this circle happens directly. There is always a man in the middle, and for you that man is Peter Lawford. He married into the Kennedy family. He lives in the Hollywood half of the world, and he spends his days carrying messages between people who can't be seen carrying their own. He arranges the dinners. He makes the calls. He decides who arrives at which door and when. You don't deal with the powerful men so much as you deal with the man who schedules the powerful men. Lawford married Patricia Kennedy on April 24, 1954, which is either a love story or the most consequential networking decision in mid-century Hollywood, depending on who you ask. His Santa Monica beach house on Oceanfront Walk becomes the informal embassy between two worlds that have no business being in the same room. On one side, the Kennedys, their ambitions, their press people, their careful public image. On the other, Sinatra, the studio system, the Palm Springs crowd, and everyone who comes with that crowd. Lawford stands in the doorway between them. He holds it open. He smiles at everyone passing through. At a party, Lawford is not at the centre. He is never at the centre. He circulates the perimeter like a waiter who used to be famous, remembering everyone's drink, introducing the person who needs to meet the person who didn't know they needed to meet them. Tonight that means he finds you near the kitchen, steers you by the elbow with the confidence of a man who has done this before, and deposits you 3 feet from whoever was requested. He doesn't stay for the conversation, he drifts. His job is the introduction, not the aftermath. The phone calls work the same way. You don't call the number directly, you call Lawford. Lawford places the call. If there's a response, it comes back through Lawford, who delivers it with the cheerful neutrality of a man who has definitely not listened to the whole conversation before relaying the relevant portion. He is, in the language of every era that came after this one, the group chat admin, except the group chat is illegal in several states and 2 of the members have FBI files. Lawford holds the door open for people who do not think about what happens to the doorman. He is useful, which is a specific kind of invisibility. Frank Sinatra finds him useful. The Kennedys find him useful. You find him useful. Everybody finds him useful right up until somebody decides he knows too much, at which point useful becomes a different kind of problem. Of course, Lawford has his own version of all of this. In his version, he is a connector, a facilitator, a man with friends in extraordinary places. He tells the stories at dinner. He is good at dinner. He orders the wine confidently and makes the toast and laughs at exactly the right volume. Bobby Whiteside, a studio associate who worked adjacent to the Lawford circle in the early 60s, once described watching Lawford introduce 2 men who had no idea they shared a mutual enemy. Lawford introduced them warmly, let them shake hands, then excused himself to get a drink he didn't want. He stood at the bar for a full 10 minutes facing the bottles, back straight, not drinking. And yet the job takes something out of a person. By the time the story reaches its harder chapters, Lawford is thinner, quieter, and drinking in a way that is no longer social. The men he connected are moving forward. He is not moving anywhere. He stays at the door. You understand this in a specific way. You have been useful too. You know what it costs. You want to see someone who cannot be seen with you, and so there is a procedure. The phone rings, or it doesn't, depending on whose phone is considered safe that month. A first name is used, never a last. A hotel suite is booked under a name belonging to nobody. A car comes to a side entrance, never the front, because the front has a doorman and the doorman has a memory. You spend a surprising amount of your life on the logistics of not being noticed, which is its own full-time position. Let's talk about Frank Sinatra's compound at 1600 North Wonder Palms Road, Palm Springs. It has a helipad. It has a guest wing. It has a kitchen that produces food at 2 in the morning without anyone seeming to ask. It is, functionally, a WeWork for people who could have each other killed, except the coffee is better and the NDAs are not written down because writing things down is a form of confession. Hollywood is in one room, the White House is in another. And in the hallway between them, someone is freshening everyone's drink. The procedure has rules, and the rules are understood without being stated. You don't arrive first, you don't stay last. You don't travel in the same car from the same direction. If a photographer is seen anywhere within a quarter mile of the driveway, the evening becomes a dinner party with a guest list of people who have never met. Plausible deniability is not a legal strategy here. It is interior design. A driver named Gerald, not his real name, but the name he uses on these evenings, picks you up at a side entrance off Sunset at a time that doesn't appear in any log. Gerald does not make conversation. Gerald has made a professional choice about conversation, and he is comfortable with it. He hands you a folded newspaper as you get in, not because there is anything in it, but because it gives you something to hold. The car smells faintly of cigarettes and the specific kind of silence that means everyone in it is being paid. The quiet is deliberate, practiced, and absolute. This is where Peter Lawford becomes load-bearing infrastructure. He is the one who knows which phone is currently safe. He is the one who books the suite under the name nobody owns. He makes the call, confirms the arrival window, cancels the one photographer who was about to be in the wrong place, and then shows up at the party looking like a man who has done nothing more complicated than choose a tie, which is the performance. The tie is part of the performance. Of course, all of this leaves a paper trail anyway. Not a neat one. Not a prosecutable one. But J. Edgar Hoover is not interested in prosecution. He's interested in the paper trail itself, its existence, its retrievability, the knowledge that he has it, and you know he has it. His file on Monroe runs to hundreds of pages and has never once resulted in charges. It doesn't need to. A file that thick doesn't have to do anything. It just has to sit in a cabinet in Washington being thick, and everyone who knows about it adjusts their behavior accordingly. The file is the leverage. The leverage is the point. Back at the compound, someone puts on a Frank Sinatra record, his own because of course, and the room arranges itself into the configuration that allows the evening to proceed. You sit where you're placed. You drink what's poured, which is Dom Perignon, possibly since noon. The conversation is bright and fast, and about nothing that would be useful to repeat, which is also deliberate. And yet the details accumulate anyway. The dress you wore, the car that came, Gerald's folded newspaper, the sound of the record. The tile floor under your feet, cool even in desert heat. You are invited to Frank Sinatra's place in Palm Springs, and the first thing you have to learn is who belongs in which room. The compound runs on an unwritten seating chart that everybody obeys and nobody explains. Studio men in one cluster, political men in another, and a third group of men whose business is never stated out loud. Frank moves between all of them like a host who is also, somehow, the subject. Your job as a guest is to know which conversations you are allowed to have walked in on. The address is 1600 North Wonder Palms Road, which sounds like a street name someone invented to describe exactly this kind of place. The main house has enough bedrooms that you could spend a weekend here and never learn how many there are. There's a pool, unheated, rarely used, mostly decorative, radiating the quiet judgment of a piece of furniture nobody sits on. The bar is the opposite. The bar is very much used and expresses no judgment whatsoever. Let's talk about the drink situation. Dom Perignon is available at most hours. The party does not start at a particular time and does not end at one either. Someone named Bobby, not that Bobby, is keeping glasses filled. Bobby's system is, if the glass is more than half empty, it's an emergency. Bobby has never been wrong about this. You drink what's handed to you, because declining is its own kind of statement, and statements here carry weight. A man named Caruso, not the singer, the other one, stands near the East Terrace most of the evening and speaks to almost no one. When he does speak, the person he speaks to straightens up slightly, as if they've just remembered something. He never raises his voice. His whole presentation is that of a man who has never needed to. He belongs to the third cluster. You do not initiate with the third cluster. The senator sits in a wicker chair and laughs at something Frank says, and across the terrace the man from Chicago laughs at the same time, and for a moment the room feels easy, casual, and entirely equal. It is none of those things. The tiers are steep, and the furniture has been arranged to make them invisible. It is not a barbecue. Sam Giancana is simultaneously the target of a federal investigation and a CIA contractor, which is less like being at a barbecue and more like being invited to your own audit. Frank plays records after dinner. Sinatra, obviously, but not always his own. Sometimes Ella, sometimes Miles Davis, sometimes someone younger that nobody's heard of yet, because Frank is making a point about taste. The music softens the air. It is doing work. The Brentwood house had its own version of this. Frank Sinatra records specifically, playing in the evenings, a detail that was either coincidence or devotion, and the house was not saying which. You, when you're here, occupy a space the compound doesn't quite have a category for. You're not studio, and you're not political, and you're certainly not the third cluster. You belong to something closer to spectacle, which in this room is its own form of power, possibly the most legible one. Everyone understands spectacle. Not everyone is equally comfortable with the other kinds. Peter Lawford stands slightly to the side of wherever the centre is. This is a skill. He's learned to be adjacent without being secondary, present without being accountable, useful without being the one who gets used. He refills no glasses himself, but he knows where Bobby is. He laughs at the right moments. He's the compound's working infrastructure, the way a very good floor does its job without anyone remarking on it. The Kennedy family sent him a formal Thanksgiving card every year. The Sinatra organization sent him projects. He was, in the language of the room, fully booked. You meet a doctor whose entire practice is making important people feel capable of getting through the day. He carries a black bag. He mixes something in a syringe, and within a minute you are sharper, faster, more like the version of yourself that gets photographed. Nobody asks too closely what's in it. Vitamins, he says, and a few other things. He has more than 100 clients exactly like you, and on certain days he flies along on the plane because performance is a schedule, and the schedule cannot afford a tired star. His name is Max Jacobson, Doctor. Max Jacobson. His clients call him Doctor. Feelgood, which is either the most honest nickname in medical history or the most alarming, depending on which direction you're standing in when you hear it. The injections are amphetamines, mixed with vitamins, and on occasion, something described in the paperwork as placenta extract. The placenta is human. Nobody clarifies whose. Let's talk about the black bag. It's not a medical bag. It's a delivery system for a particular kind of confidence, administered at a rate that keeps you functional, presentable, and willing to stand in a spotlight for another 2 hours. Doctor. Jacobson has 150 clients doing exactly this. Actors, politicians, artists, at least one president. The president's back is bad. His adrenal glands don't function correctly. He has been managing this with cortisone and painkillers and, now, whatever Dr. Jacobson mixes in that syringe. On some legs of the presidential schedule, the doctor boards Air Force One. This is not a metaphor. The bag goes through security. The bag has always gone through security. Meanwhile, your own medicine cabinet has developed a kind of geological complexity. There are bottles from Dr. Jacobson. There are bottles from Dr. Greenson, who is your psychiatrist and has opinions about the other bottles. There are bottles from a third prescribing physician, whose name appears on labels alongside a dosage instruction that none of the three men have apparently discussed with each other. The bottles coexist peacefully. Chloral hydrate for sleep. Nembutal for sleep when the chloral hydrate fails. Something for anxiety. Something for the anxiety about the anxiety. The cabinet doesn't judge. It just fills up. A nurse named Marta Ruiz, quick hands, very flat expression, hands you a glass of water each morning with the seriousness of someone diffusing something. She sets it down. She doesn't look at the cabinet. Neither do you. You've both agreed, without speaking, that the cabinet is just furniture. You have a scene in 3 hours, and the amphetamines earn their keep right here. The scene requires you to be luminous. Luminous is not a thing you feel at 7 in the morning after 4 hours of sleep and a glass of Dom Perignon that technically happened before breakfast but only barely. Doctor. Jacobson's syringe is the bridge between what you are at 7 in the morning and what you need to be by 10. He notes this in his records as vitamins and supplements. The FDA, arriving to investigate him in 1962, will note something else entirely. The FDA's notes are more detailed. The president has a version of the same arrangement. His is managed with more institutional vocabulary, cortisone injections, pain management, supplemental treatments, but the man flying in with a black bag is the same man. Doctor. Jacobson treats over 150 clients with the same confident informality, which makes him basically a SoulCycle membership, except the energy boost is amphetamine and your instructor has a medical license and a seat on the government plane. Dr. Jacobson does not hide. He makes house calls, he attends events. He sits in green rooms and waiting areas with a black bag balanced on his knee, and nobody asks what's inside it. Asking would mean admitting that the performance requires maintenance, and the maintenance is the one thing that cannot reach the press. So the bag stays on his knee, and the room keeps not looking at it. You finish the injection. The room sharpens. You stand up straighter. Somewhere, 3 floors up and 5 states away, the president does the same thing. The bag goes back into the bag. You cannot sleep, and you have not been able to sleep for years, so falling asleep has become a project you manage like a small business. There are pills for it, and the pills come from more than one doctor, and the doctors are not in the habit of comparing notes. You take one, then another, then you wait, then you take a third because the first 2 appear to have changed their minds. The medicine cabinet holds bottles in several different handwritings. None of them are speaking to each other. The Brentwood house is quiet in the way houses are quiet when they are trying to be. The Mexican tiles on the floor hold the cold a little past midnight, and the fountain in the courtyard runs at a soft, patient pitch that does not quite cancel the silence but does something adjacent to it. You found those tiles yourself, on a trip down to Tijuana in the early part of the year, and you hauled them back across the border in a manner that suggested someone who believed that the right floor could solve things. It cannot. But it smells correct, at least. It smells like somewhere you intended to be. The white bedroom is very white. White linen curtains. White walls. The idea was simplicity, which is a quality you have been pursuing professionally for your entire adult life and have not yet located. Eunice Murray is somewhere in the house, placed there by Dr. Greenson, who is concerned about the isolation in the way a man is concerned about a thing he is partly responsible for. She makes coffee in the morning and is present in the evenings without quite being company. She moves through rooms the way a footnote moves through a document. You know she's there. You don't engage with the content. The red diary is small, private, and incriminating, and it contains what you heard, which is not a small amount. You write down things people tell you because you have been in rooms where people forget you are a person and speak as if you are furniture, and the furniture has been listening for years. The diary has been seen by at least 2 men. Dr. Greenson read it, apparently in a clinical capacity, and RFK, according to multiple accounts, in a less clearly defined one. Its current location is unknown. This is one of those facts that sits very still in the middle of a room and does not explain itself. The insomnia has a logic, if not a cure. On the amphetamines, everything is sharp and fast and slightly terrifying. Your mind runs at a speed that is not conducive to sleep and is also not entirely conducive to sustained calm, and the energy that was injected into you at 11 in the morning has opinions at 3 in the morning. The chloral hydrate is the answer to the question the amphetamines asked. The Nembutal is the answer to the question the chloral hydrate failed to fully resolve. The body keeps receiving answers to questions it wasn't sure it had asked. The arithmetic of this has never worked out in your favor. The Frank Sinatra records help, actually. Not because they are soothing exactly, but because they are familiar, and familiar is a category you don't have unlimited access to. You pour something good, the Dom Perignon is cold, and you drink it the way some people drink orange juice, which is to say in the morning, and also in the evening, and occasionally in the space between those two things that does not have a socially agreed upon name. The champagne doesn't fix the sleep, but it softens the waiting. You are very good at waiting. You have been waiting your entire life for something to land, and it keeps not quite landing, and in the meantime the fountain runs in the courtyard and the tiles are cold and the curtains are white and the bottles in the cabinet have their own quiet arrangement going. Elena, the woman who sometimes helps in the kitchen, sets a mug of Mexican hot chocolate on the counter on cool mornings without comment, as if she is leaving evidence and not a gift. You wrap both hands around it. The warmth travels up into your wrists. This is, at 7 in the morning, after no particular amount of sleep, possibly the most reliable thing that happens all day. The swimming pool is unheated. You rarely use it. You run a bath, and this is not about being clean. The bath is where you go to put yourself back into one piece after a day spent being divided among other people's needs. You fill the tub, you sink in, and for a stretch of time nobody can reach you, schedule you, or photograph you. Your own psychiatrist will eventually write it down in his notes as one of the few things that reliably settles you. It's the cheapest, simplest medicine you own, and the only one that doesn't come in a bottle. The tub itself has opinions. It's deep, and the hot water takes longer than it should, and while you wait, you sit on the edge in a robe listening to the courtyard fountain do its small, consistent work outside the window. The house is quiet in the way that houses are quiet when someone is listening very hard to make sure it stays that way. Eunice is somewhere on the other side of a wall. She is always somewhere on the other side of a wall. This bath is managing something specific. You've been on set since 6 in the morning, or you were supposed to be, which is a different situation with the same early alarm. Your body runs on amphetamines and intentions, and by evening the amphetamines have worn off in the specific way they do, not gently, not gradually, but all at once, like a stage light cut at the board. What's left is a kind of ringing. The bath is for the ringing. Dr. Greenson has a theory about this, which he has explained to you across many hours and many sessions in a professional language that roughly translates to, "You are trying to feel held." He is probably right. He is almost always right in ways that don't actually help. His solution was to place Eunice Murray in your house, which is the psychiatric equivalent of treating insomnia by hiring someone to watch you not sleep. After the bath comes the chloral hydrate. Not in the water. After. The bath is the attempt. The chloral hydrate is the acknowledgement that the attempt didn't fully work. You've got at least 3 doctors prescribing things that the 3 of them are, as far as anyone can tell, not comparing notes on. Your medicine cabinet looks like a staff meeting where nobody showed up for the other departments. The bottles have different names on the labels. The pills are different colors. The effect is cumulative in ways that none of the labels mention. A woman named Rosalind, one of the few people who comes by without an agenda attached, brings you a cup of Mexican hot chocolate sometimes in the late evening, sets it on the edge of the tub without a word, and leaves. She sets it down with the carefulness of someone placing a glass near a sleeping animal. The chocolate is dark, spiced, and faintly bitter, and it steams in a way that makes the whole room feel warmer than it is. You drink it slowly. The Sinatra record is still going in the other room. It's been going since dinner. The music moves through the wall in the way that music does when a house is mostly quiet. You don't hear all of it, just the parts that carry. A low brass line. The top of a lyric. Enough to know the song without having to follow it. Outside, the Brentwood neighborhood is doing its very normal, very expensive evening. Dogs are walked. Sprinklers tick on. Nobody out there knows what's in your medicine cabinet, or what your psychiatrist writes in his notes, or that your phone records from this address are going to become a significant evidentiary problem for a Los Angeles DA review in 1982. That review, decades from now, will arrive at the conclusion that more questions exist than were originally assumed. The phone records will not be part of it. The phone records will not be anywhere, but that's later. Right now the water is still warm. The chocolate is still there. The fountain is still going in the courtyard, doing what fountains do, which is make a sound that your nervous system mistakes for safety. You stay in the bath a little longer than you planned. You always do. You get married, and then, with a regularity that surprises even you get unmarried. There is a ball player, a wedding at City Hall, and a divorce filed 9 months later. There is a playwright, a longer marriage, and another set of papers. Each time, the public treats it as a fairy tale and the lawyers treat it as a transaction, and you are the only one in the room who has to live in both versions at once. Marriage, in your life, comes with a filing date already half written. Joe DiMaggio walks into a room the way certain men do, like the room has been expecting him, and is slightly relieved he showed up. You marry him on January 14, 1954, at San Francisco City Hall. The ceremony takes about 10 minutes. The photographers take considerably longer. Joe stands straight in his suit, and you stand next to him, and somewhere in the middle of it you become Mrs. DiMaggio, which is the name he was hoping would stick. It doesn't. You file for divorce 9 months later, citing mental cruelty, which is the legal phrase for a very long list of things that don't fit on a form. Arthur Miller is different. He writes plays. He has opinions about things, serious ones, and he wants to know yours, which is not a universal experience in your life. You marry him June 29, 1956. The marriage lasts 4.5 years, which in your biography counts as stability. He writes a screenplay for you, The Misfits, which is possibly the least romantic title a husband has ever chosen for a film about his wife. You film it in the Nevada desert in 110-degree heat. Clark Gable is there. Everyone is miserable in ways that are difficult to document. You sign the divorce papers January 20, 1961. The ink is barely dry before the Attorney General of the United States starts appearing at parties where you also appear, which is a different kind of complication entirely. The thing about being married in public is that the marriage belongs to everyone. The wedding photos belong to the magazine. The divorce belongs to the column. The part that is actually yours, the argument at 2 a.m., the silence at breakfast, the specific quality of loneliness that exists inside a marriage rather than outside one, that part is never printed. It doesn't photograph well. Marilyn, a production assistant named Rodney, keeps a call sheet for your absences from set, which is a job that exists specifically because of you. He updates it by hand. He uses a ruler for the columns, which suggests he has accepted this as a long-term assignment. The DiMaggio chapter doesn't end with the divorce. He shows up again, quietly, in the last months. He's not on a call sheet. He doesn't appear in anyone's file, not even Hoover's, which is almost impressive. He just comes back, the way someone does when they've decided that whatever went wrong was less important than the alternative. He brings groceries. He sits in the kitchen, steady, quiet, and unhurried. He doesn't offer opinions. After you die, he arranges the funeral, keeps the press out, and has red roses sent to your crypt at Westwood Village 3 times a week. He does this for 20 years. Not once. Not for a month. 20 years, 3 times a week, until he dies in 1999. There is no press release for this. There's no announcement. He just does it the way someone does a thing they've decided is now simply part of their life. The roses don't fix anything. They're not meant to. They're just roses, delivered on a schedule, to someone who can't receive them. You learn to assume the room is listening, because in your world, the room usually is. The phones may be tapped, the suites may be wired, and the men who do the wiring are professionals who never appear in the photographs. You don't always know which conversations are being kept. You just operate as if all of them are, which changes the way you say even ordinary things. There is a particular flatness you develop, the voice of someone who has accepted she is always, quietly, on the record. J. Edgar Hoover has been director of the FBI since 1924. He will remain director until he dies in 1972. That is 48 years. In that time, he accumulates files on actors, senators, civil rights leaders, and at least one very famous blonde in a white bedroom in Brentwood. Your file runs to hundreds of pages. He doesn't use it to arrest you. He uses it the way some people use screenshots, not to send, just to have. Hoover's files are basically a LinkedIn network, except every connection is something he could ruin you with, and nobody gets to disconnect. What he's collecting is associations, mostly. You were married to Arthur Miller, who had been called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. That's enough to open a file. The file then grows, the way files do, adding names and dates and phone numbers until it becomes less a document and more a weather system. The file has its own momentum. It doesn't need new information to keep existing. It just keeps existing. Meanwhile, your phone at 444 East 57th Street has a particular quality to it. A faint something. Not static exactly. More like the sense that the line is occupied by one more person than you dialed. You stop saying certain names into it. You stop saying certain things. You develop the habit of pausing before sentences, the way a person pauses before stepping onto ice they're not sure about. The pause becomes invisible. It becomes you. A small red diary enters the picture here. You keep it somewhere in the Brentwood house, the one with Mexican tiles you hauled back from Tijuana, the one that smells faintly of grout and ambition. The diary is small enough to hold in one hand. In it you write down things you've heard, things you've been told in rooms that were supposed to be private. Dr. Ralph Greenson, your psychiatrist, sees it. At least one other person reportedly sees it. After August 5, 1962, no one finds it. The diary has been missing for 60-plus years, which is a long time to be small and red, and presumably somewhere. Now, the phone records. On August 4, 1962, your last full day, you make calls. The calls are logged at the phone company, the way calls are. Shortly after your death, those logs will be gone, removed, not lost, and never seen again. The calls you made on the last day of your life are, at this point, the most famous phone calls no one can prove happened. A housekeeper named Eunice Murray is staying in your house, placed there by Greenson, who worries about you being alone. She is technically a companion. She is practically a presence that reports. She sleeps in the room down the hall. She has opinions about the hours you keep. On the morning of August 5, she calls Greenson at roughly 3 in the morning. She says your bedroom light is on and your door is locked. He arrives. He breaks a window. He does not immediately call the police. The gap between breaking the window and calling the police is somewhere between 1 and 4 hours, depending on which account you read. The accounts do not agree. They have never agreed. Sergeant Jack Clemens arrives first. He notes the room, still, tidy and wrong. He notes the smell, sharp, chemical, the specific bitterness of chloral hydrate, which has opinions about the air it occupies. He notes the body. He notes the cabinet's mismatched bottles. The cabinet is doing a lot of work for one cabinet. 2 decades on, a Los Angeles DA review will sift the record and conclude the death is consistent with suicide, the timeline still full of questions. The phone records, by then, are long gone. The diary too. The questions remain exactly where the evidence used to be. You exist, without ever meeting him, inside a filing cabinet belonging to J. Edgar Hoover. He has run the FBI since before you were famous, and his particular genius is collecting things he has no intention of using. Your file runs to hundreds of pages, your friendships, your marriages, your politics, your phone calls. He doesn't arrest anyone with it. He never planned to. The file isn't evidence. It's a savings account, and the interest it pays is that the most powerful men in the country are careful around the man who keeps it. Your file started, technically, with Arthur Miller. Miller was subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1956, which meant the FBI needed to know everything about everyone Miller knew, which meant you. The logic is circular. The surveillance doesn't care. By the time you divorced Miller in January 1961, the file had grown well past anything a marriage could explain, and nobody scaled it back. Files don't go on diets. Hoover does something specific with what he knows. He doesn't call press conferences. He doesn't file charges. What he does is make a quiet phone call, or show up for a meeting, or simply let it be known through the comfortable machinery of Washington implication that he is aware of certain things. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, whose Justice Department technically oversees the FBI, is also in Hoover's files. The files have opinions about who is in charge of whom. The files are very confident about this. The press has its own version of the same arrangement. Editors like Ben Bradley and reporters like Hugh Sidey know about the president's private life. They know names, dates, addresses. They know about you. Not one of them prints it. The understanding is that the presidency functions better when certain compartments stay sealed, which is basically a group chat where everyone has the screenshots and has made a collective, unspoken, permanent decision to never forward them. The group chat has been running since roughly 1961. Nobody has left. Meanwhile, a woman named Judith Campbell Exner is carrying envelopes. She dates the president. She also dates Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss that Robert Kennedy's Justice Department is actively trying to imprison, and that the CIA has simultaneously hired to assassinate Fidel Castro. The envelopes reportedly moved between Kennedy and Giancana in 1960 and 1961. What's in the envelopes is not confirmed. That they exist is. Hoover knows about Judith Campbell Exner. Hoover knows about all of it. He files it carefully and says nothing, which is a form of saying everything. Your own politics are in there too. Rally attendance, petition signatures, associations with people who knew people the FBI considered suspicious. A clerk in the Los Angeles field office files a summary note about your presence at a progressive fundraiser in 1958. She uses 3 rubber stamps. The note goes into your cabinet, alphabetized, never acted upon. She goes home, with no idea she has just contributed to the most elaborate non-prosecution in federal history. By 1962, the file is patient, alphabetized, and never closed. It accumulates. It breathes. It has become heavier than the actual events it describes. The entries now include surveillance of your Brentwood address, notes on visitors, references to phone calls, the phone records from August 4th, who you called and when, on the last full day of your life, will not survive much past your death. Hoover's file doesn't explain where they went. It doesn't have to. The file outlives you. It outlives Kennedy. It is partially declassified decades later, and researchers read through hundreds of pages looking for the thing that explains everything, and find instead the texture of a life. Every phone call, every friendship, every marriage. Hundreds of pages of proximity to power, filed by a man who collected and never spent. He kept the balance growing for 48 years, locked in a cabinet only he could open. Robert Kennedy weighs his words before he speaks to Hoover. Editors set down their pencils. Across Washington, powerful men lower their voices in rooms Hoover has never entered, careful around a drawer they will never see inside. You sit at tables where the guest list shouldn't exist. A mob boss from Chicago is, at the same moment, a man the Attorney General is trying to send to prison and a man the government has quietly hired for a job it will never admit to. Everyone at the table knows at least 2 of these facts and pretends to know none of them. You pass the bread. You laugh at the right places. You have learned that in this circle, the most dangerous people are simply the ones who are also the most charming. Sam Giancana is technically a guest. He's also technically a federal target. He's also technically on retainer, not by the Attorney General's office, which wants him in a cell, but by the CIA, which wants him to kill a man in Cuba. These are 3 different institutions with 3 different agendas, and all 3 are currently in the same room wearing dinner jackets. The CIA doesn't mention the Attorney General. The Attorney General's office doesn't mention the CIA. Everyone mentions Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs compound at 1600 North Wonder Palms Road is, functionally, a WeWork for people who could have each other killed. You arrive through a gate. The house has a name, the compound, which is a word that sounds like it should involve fencing and watchtowers, but here mostly means there are several cottages and a good kitchen. Giancana has slept in one cottage. The president has slept in another. You wonder, not for the first time, about the thread count and whether the pillowcases are laundered between occupants or just turned over. Let's talk about Judith Campbell Exner. She dates JFK. She dates Giancana. She says she carries envelopes between them, sealed, unread, and deniable, handed across a threshold, receipted by no one. She is a courier for the most surveilled men in America, trusted with cargo she is forbidden to open. The envelopes contain what they contain. She doesn't ask. The president doesn't explain. Giancana doesn't explain anything ever, because explaining things is professionally inadvisable when you are Sam Giancana. Meanwhile, Robert Kennedy's Justice Department is building a case against Giancana with the seriousness of men who do not know, or will not acknowledge, that their target is currently also employed by the same federal government they work for. Operation Mongoose is the name. The goal is Castro. The contractor is the Chicago mob. The oversight is invisible. Robert Kennedy signs the memos on one floor. The CIA handles the recruitment on another. Nobody rides the same elevator. This is not an accident. A career waitress named Elena Ramos, stationed at a Sinatra party in late 1961, would later describe refilling a man's glass 3 times before realizing the man kept moving. He didn't leave. He just drifted, clockwise, around the room, like a very well-dressed weather system. That was Giancana. He never stayed in one conversational orbit long enough to be pinned to it. You watch this and file it. The red diary in your bedside drawer at the Brentwood house has notes in it, not gossip exactly. More like an accounting. Things said. Names adjacent to other names. Dates. You write in it because you are, underneath all of it, a woman trying to keep track of the world, and the world has lately been moving very fast. Of course, the diary is not a safe place for any of this. Nothing is a safe place for any of this. Greenson has seen it. You know at least one other person has looked. You don't move it because moving it would require deciding where safety is, and you're not entirely sure safety has an address in this neighborhood of your life. The bread gets passed again. Someone makes a toast. Giancana raises his glass without drinking. The president, at a different table, at a different party, on a different coast, is doing something broadly similar, present, charming, technically undisclosed. 2 men, 1 woman between them, not carrying envelopes, carrying something heavier and harder to hand off, the accounting. You hear about a woman whose role in this world is to carry things between men who can't be seen exchanging them. She knows the president and she knows the mob boss, and for a stretch of time she moves between the 2 of them with envelopes she is not supposed to open. It is a job nobody advertises and everybody needs. She is part courier, part alibi, part loose end. You recognize the shape of it immediately, because it is, with the names changed, a job you have been offered in 100 quieter ways. Her name is Judith Campbell Exner. She's introduced to John Kennedy by Frank Sinatra in February 1960 at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, which is the kind of sentence that requires no further decoration. The same Sinatra who introduced her to the president also introduced her to Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss, a few weeks later, which either suggests Sinatra had very poor object permanence or very good planning. The introductions are social. They feel like favors. They become something harder to categorize by the time the envelopes start moving. Let's talk about the envelopes. She says she carried them between Giancana and Kennedy, sealed, unread, and unrecorded, starting sometime in 1960 and continuing into 1961. She doesn't say what's in them. The men receiving them don't say either. The FBI, which is watching Giancana's phone calls and watching Kennedy's associations and is definitely watching Judith Campbell Exner, produces a surveillance log that confirms the relationships exist without specifying what moves between them. It's basically a very expensive footnote. J. Edgar Hoover files it carefully, because Hoover's files are not prosecution, they are leverage. Robert Kennedy's Justice Department is actively building a racketeering case against Giancana. The CIA has separately hired Giancana to participate in plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. The president is receiving sealed envelopes from a woman who is also the mob boss's girlfriend. Everyone involved knows about at least 2 of these facts. Nobody knows all of them simultaneously, except possibly Hoover, who keeps his files in a room that he alone controls and who has never, in 40 years of directorship, done anything with information he could be using except make sure you knew he had it. A Senate staffer named Frank Cawthon, who works one floor down from the rooms where some of these decisions are made, later tells an interviewer that the corridors felt normal. People brought coffee. The windows had curtains. It looked like an office. In 1975, Judith Campbell Exner gives her account to the Church Committee investigating intelligence abuses. And again, in a memoir published in 1977, the details are specific enough to be credible and vague enough to be deniable, which is probably the only way you survive writing that memoir. She says she never read the envelopes. She says she didn't ask. She says the asking felt dangerous, so she didn't do it. You believe her, not because the story is tidy, but because that's exactly what not asking looks like from the inside. Of course, everyone in this particular circle has a specific talent for not asking. The press doesn't ask. The Secret Service looks at the ceiling. Ben Bradlee, who is friends with Kennedy and editing a newsroom, knows enough that if the knowledge were a physical object, it would require a second suitcase. He doesn't print it. The informal code of the era holds that a president's private life is private, which is basically a group chat where everyone has the screenshots and nobody is going to forward them. Exner describes the meetings as ordinary in texture. A hotel suite, a phone call ahead of time, handing something over, and then leaving before anyone notices she arrived. She dresses for these appointments carefully, not loudly. The goal is to move through a lobby like furniture. She's very good at it. The Church Committee concludes that the Exner relationship posed a national security risk and closes the chapter. The envelopes are never found. Their contents are never established. What you're left with is a woman who carried things she couldn't name between men who couldn't acknowledge her, in the service of arrangements nobody would ever put in writing. The records of what she transported are exactly as complete as everyone involved needed them to be. Not complete at all. You operate inside a press arrangement that would look, from any other decade, completely insane. The reporters know. The editors know. The men at the big magazines have the details and the dates and in some cases the first-hand sightings, and they have all quietly agreed that a president's private life is simply not a thing one writes down. It isn't a law. It's a gentleman's understanding which is more durable than a law. You live a life that everyone with a press badge could end in a sentence, protected entirely by their decision not to. Ben Bradlee knows. Bradlee is Newsweek's Washington bureau chief and also a personal friend of the president, which is a journalistic arrangement that would today require about 40 disclosure forms and a podcast episode of explanation. He has dinner at the White House. He hears things. He files none of it. Hugh Sidey at Time knows. The wire photographers who catch the edges of things know. They share a group understanding that is basically a group chat where everyone has the screenshots and nobody is going to forward them. The understanding holds not because anyone is threatened, not exactly, but because the men who make these decisions have decided, collectively and without meeting about it, that the office is the story and the man inside it is not. Bradlee doesn't protect one person. He protects the whole arrangement. When he sets down his pencil, the president's private life stays private, the side arrangements stay private, and the people inside those arrangements stay useful. Pull one thread, and the fabric comes apart for everyone, Bradlee included. It's less a moral position than a structural preference, like an HOA rule nobody wrote down because everyone understood it on move-in day. Practically, the code requires a photographer to lower his camera. It requires a journalist to describe what he saw at a party as the president was in fine spirits. It requires a caption writer to note the time and location and leave out who was standing just outside the frame, discreet, deliberate, and practiced. Gerald, a wire photographer who works the White House rotation, has a particular talent for this. He adjusts his lens slightly right, and clicks at the precise moment the frame contains only wallpaper. He has done this so many times the adjustment is automatic now. He does not think of it as a choice. The code doesn't protect you the way it protects the president. The press is quiet about him because quietness is the professional standard for men of his position. The press is quiet about you because you're an actress, and actresses are either scandalous or sympathetic depending entirely on who's doing the framing, and the people doing the framing are the same people who've just agreed not to frame anything at all. Your silence comes with no guarantee attached. You are protected by proximity to him, which is not the same as being protected. Meanwhile, the FBI is not quiet about any of it. Hoover's files on Monroe run to hundreds of pages, covering her movements, her associates, her mail, her former husband Arthur Miller's leftist connections, which is what got her into the file originally. The file isn't prosecution material. It never becomes prosecution material. It exists because Hoover understands the same thing the press understands, that knowing is power, and knowing and not printing is more power than printing. You keep reading the papers. They cover the gala. They cover the gown. Peter Lawford introduces you as the late Marilyn Monroe, a joke about your famous relationship with punctuality, and the room laughs, and the papers print the joke because the joke is harmless. They print the rhinestones. They print the president's quip about retiring from politics. They print 15,000 people in Madison Square Garden applauding a birthday song. None of it is false. It's just very precisely what fits inside the frame, Gerald pointed slightly right. You are getting ready to sing for the president, and getting ready takes a tailor and a needle and a great deal of patience. The gown is the colour of skin and covered in roughly 2,500 rhinestones, each one set by hand, and it does not have a zipper because a zipper would ruin the line, so they sew you into it. You stand very still while they do, because there is no other option available, and you practice breathing in the small amount of room the dress has decided to allow you. The date is May 19, 1962. The venue is Madison Square Garden. The occasion is the president's 45th birthday gala, though the president himself will turn 45 10 days later because scheduling is what it is. There are roughly 15,000 people in the room. You are 40 minutes late, which is a number that will become part of the evening's official comedy. Peter Lawford walks to the microphone to introduce you. He's the man who arranged this, who arranges most things that require the Kennedy world and the Hollywood world to share a room without documentation. His introduction is, the late Marilyn Monroe. The crowd laughs. He means your punctuality. Or he means something else. Either way, the joke lands, and then you walk out, and the crowd forgets to laugh about anything for a while. The gown, up close, is doing a great deal of structural work. Jean-Louis designed it in flesh-toned soufflé fabric so sheer that under stage lights the impression is of no dress at all, which is of course entirely the impression. The 2,500 rhinestones are distributed across the surface with the deliberateness of someone who had a very specific goal in mind and a lot of time to pursue it. You can't sit down in it. You can't fully inhale in it. It is tight, weighted, and unforgiving, and it has opinions about how much you should move, and those opinions are conservative. What you sing is Happy Birthday. It is 12 seconds long, as written. Your version takes considerably longer, because you are not singing a song so much as addressing a person in front of 15,000 witnesses, and that requires pace. Your voice is low and close and utterly unhurried, as if the garden is a room and the room contains only the two of you. JFK sits in the audience for this. Afterward, he steps to a microphone and says he can now retire from politics, having had Happy Birthday sung to him in such a sweet, wholesome way. The crowd laughs again. He is very good at this. The dress, for the record, will outlast most of what happens next. It is the gown that will years later outsell most of the films you made in it. It is now behind museum glass in Florida, which is not where anyone would have predicted it ending up, but that's Florida. Back in June, 20th Century Fox terminates your contract. The studio has been furious for months. You've missed days on the set of Something's Got to Give, and attending a presidential birthday gala while on medical leave is, in their view, not helping. The studio uses the gala as partial justification. This is the logic. The biggest female box office star of the decade is fired partly for showing up to sing 12 seconds of a song. The math doesn't work in your favour, but the math never has. A wardrobe assistant cuts you out of the dress sometime after midnight. She works carefully, because the rhinestones are not replaceable, because nothing about this is replaceable. Outside, the city is doing what it does. You go home, and the gown goes into a box, and the box goes somewhere. 60 years later, someone in an auction house photographs it under flattering light, and the bidding starts at a number your estate could not have covered. You walk out in front of 15,000 people, and the man introducing you announces you as the late Marilyn Monroe, a joke about your reputation for arriving 40 minutes after everyone else. You take the microphone. You sing 11 words, slowly, in a voice you have engineered to sound like it is being thought up on the spot. It lasts about 3.5 minutes. The president stands up afterward and says he can retire now, having had happy birthday sung to him in such a sweet, wholesome way. Everybody laughs. Nobody is fooled. Let's talk about the gown. It's not a gown. It's a contract. Jean Louis has stitched 2,500 rhinestones onto flesh-toned soufflé fabric, so sheer that from 15 rows back you appear to be wearing the idea of a dress rather than an actual one. The gown is tight, glittering, and entirely unforgiving. It is so tight that a team of people has sewn you into it backstage, which means you cannot sit down, cannot fully exhale, and are essentially a human architectural feature until someone unstitches you afterward. It is the gown that will, years later, outsell most of the films you made in it. The room is Madison Square Garden, May 19, 1962. Outside, the Cold War is doing its usual thing, tense, ongoing, poorly managed. Inside, 15,000 people are watching a woman in a rhinestone vacuum perform a birthday song for the leader of the free world, while his wife is, notably, not present. Jackie Kennedy has declined to attend. She has sent her regrets. The regrets were well chosen. The performance itself is worth examining. You have arrived famously late enough that Peter Lawford, the man who arranged this entire evening and will spend the next decade regretting that he did, has already introduced you twice as a joke and once in earnest. When you finally appear, the crowd understands immediately that whatever is about to happen is not, technically, a birthday song. It is something slower. Something that has an agenda. JFK is sitting there in his tuxedo with the practiced composure of a man who has been briefed on this moment and has decided that the correct response is a fixed smile and a quip about wholesome retirement. He deploys it immediately. It lands. He is very good at that. A photographer named George Barris had shot you on a Santa Monica beach 6 weeks earlier, in July, for Cosmopolitan. Those photographs, your last major session, show you alternately luminous and somewhere else entirely, like a woman who has briefly stopped performing and forgotten to pick it back up. You are tan. You are laughing in some of them. In others, you are staring at something just past the camera that the camera cannot catch. Barris later said you seemed happy. He also said you seemed frightened. Both things appear to be true simultaneously, which was, by 1962, something of a permanent condition. Back in the garden, the moment ends. The president's 45th birthday has been adequately celebrated. You step off the stage and back into the regular machinery of your life, which includes, at this point, a recently terminated marriage, a contract dispute with 20th Century Fox that is escalating toward your firing, a Brentwood medicine cabinet that answers to no single doctor, and a small red diary in which you have been writing things down. 2 men have reportedly read it. No one has found it since. The diary doesn't announce itself. It sits somewhere in the Brentwood house at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive, among the Mexican tiles you hauled back from Tijuana, near the tile fountain in the courtyard that you find calming, in a house that smells like a project you were only halfway finished with. You bought it in January for $75,000. You planted things. You sourced things. The swimming pool is unheated and you rarely use it, but it's yours, which at this particular moment in your life counts for more than it might seem. You go to New York to sing at the gala, and the studio you are under contract to has not given you permission to be there. You are, at this very moment, supposed to be on a sound stage finishing a film you have been late to repeatedly. The executives watch you on television in a rhinestone dress, charming the President of the United States, and they reach for the contract. Within weeks, they fire the biggest female star of the decade. The official reason is absence. The real reason is that you proved you belong to someone other than them. The film is called Something's Got to Give. That title, in retrospect, is doing a lot of work. It's a romantic comedy, a remake, actually, of a 1940 Cary Grant picture, and 20th Century Fox has budgeted it carefully, cast it carefully, and scheduled it around you, with the awareness that scheduling anything around you requires a certain tolerance for revision. You've missed days. You've missed weeks. A doctor's note arrives occasionally, which the studio files alongside its feelings about the situation. Then you vanish to New York for 4 days to wear a dress in front of 15,000 people and a sitting president, and Fox decides the note system isn't working. Do the math. The studio calculates that your absences have cost them somewhere around $2 million in production delays. They say this publicly, with the confidence of an organization that has decided a number will make them look reasonable. What they don't calculate publicly is what the film would have earned with your name above the title, because that number would ruin the argument. You are the top female box office draw of the decade. You are also, at this moment, unemployed. The contract termination papers are filed in June 1962. The studio mails them with the energy of a landlord who has been waiting months to do exactly this. A director named George Cukor is on the project. He and you have not gotten along, which is its own long story involving creative differences and the specific personality of a set where everyone has an opinion about how you work. Dean Martin is your co-star. Dean Martin, to his credit, refuses to continue without you after the firing. He does this not with a speech, but by simply not showing up, which is the most elegant possible protest and also the one thing 20th Century Fox genuinely wasn't expecting. The production collapses. Fox sues. Martin countersues. The numbers get very large very fast. Meanwhile, Fox is also negotiating to rehire you because the math is the math. By late July 1962, reps are in conversations about bringing you back at a higher salary than the one they just fired you over. There are memos. There are phone calls. Your press agent, Patricia Newcomb, fields questions about your availability. A photographer named George Barris takes pictures of you on a Santa Monica beach in the last weeks of July, the last formal shoot of your life, and in some of them you look incandescent, and in others you look like someone who has been awake too long and knows it. The rehiring doesn't happen. The window is shorter than the negotiations. What Fox never entirely grasps is that you are not actually late to their film because of recklessness. The Brentwood cabinet's overlapping prescriptions have a way of making mornings unreliable. A call time of 6 a.m. is a reasonable professional expectation. It is also, given the pharmaceutical situation, essentially a dare. Your publicist handles the optics, Dr. Greenson handles the prescriptions, nobody's handling the overlap. The studio fires you for absence and writes that word on the papers as if it settled something. But you miss the 6 a.m. call times because of prescriptions that never accounted for one another. Greenson writes one, Engelberg writes another. A third name appears on a bottle nobody can quite account for. The medicine cabinet holds the quiet, bitter, overlapping evidence of all of it, and it doesn't comment. It just holds what it holds and waits for morning. You buy a house in Brentwood, and for the first time in your life, the decisions about how you live are yours to make. You drive down to Tijuana to choose the tiles yourself, because for most of your life other people furnished the rooms you slept in. You pick the fountain. You commission a small mosaic for the entrance. It is a modest house by movie star standards, which is partly the point. It is small enough to actually belong to one person, and the one for once, is going to be you. The address is 12305 Fifth Helena Drive, and you pay $75,000 for it in January 1962. That is not a small amount. It is also, for context, roughly what a mid-range studio executive spends on his car and his car's car. The house has a courtyard. The fountain runs. On cool mornings, you drink Mexican hot chocolate and stand near the fountain, and the tiles smell faintly of the trip where you chose them, which is a smell you chose too. Fuego. The bedroom is white. White walls, white linen curtains, white sheets. People who read too much into things will read into this. You're not thinking about symbolism. You're thinking about whether the curtains hang right. They hang right. You play Frank Sinatra records in the evenings, which is either deeply ironic given recent events or just a preference for the voice, and the answer is probably both, and you play them anyway. This is where Dr. Ralph Greenson becomes part of the house. He is your psychiatrist, and he is worried about you, specifically about the evenings, the quiet, the particular quality of the silence when you are alone in a room that contains too many prescription bottles and not enough company. His solution is Eunice Murray. Mrs. Murray is a housekeeper and companion and general presence, installed by Greenson with the low-key authority of a man placing a piece on a board. She waters the plants. She sleeps in the small back room. She watches, in the way that people watch when they've been asked to watch by someone who doesn't want to say the word watch. Let's talk about the medicine cabinet. It doesn't lock, which is the first thing, and the second thing is that it holds bottles from at least 3 different prescribing physicians who are conducting what can only be described as a non-collaborative experiment. Chloral hydrate is in there. Nembutal is in there. There are vitamins, probably. somewhere. The cabinet has the organizational logic of a filing system where everyone has their own folder and no one has read the other folders, and the subject of all the folders is you. A housekeeper who watches, a fountain that runs. Eunice Murray moves through the rooms with the quiet, patient, watchful efficiency of someone hired for a function she cannot name out loud. She brings you tea. She straightens a cushion that wasn't crooked. In the evening, she pauses at the bathroom door, glances at the line of bottles on the shelf, and says nothing, then mentions it to Dr. Greenson on the phone in the morning when you are still asleep. She is not malicious. She is not unkind. She is simply the one who notices and reports. You take long baths. The water is warm. The house is yours in the legal and architectural sense, and in the morning the courtyard fills with light off the Mexican tiles and the fountain makes a sound that is genuinely calming. You came here for this. The studio is in the process of firing you. 3 doctors are writing prescriptions. Eunice Murray is asleep in the back room. The house costs $75,000 and you are the top female box office drawer of the decade. And that math is its own kind of comment. You don't think about the math. You think about whether to have the Dom Perignon now or later. Later, probably. Maybe now. The fountain runs. The curtains hang right. You acquire a housekeeper, except the arrangement is stranger than that word makes it sound. Your psychiatrist is worried about how alone you are, so he arranges for a woman he trusts to live in your house. She keeps the place running, she keeps you company, and she also gently keeps an eye. You are never entirely sure which of her jobs is the main one. She is part employee, part chaperone, part early warning system, and she reports in her quiet way to any man who is not you. Her name is Eunice Murray. She is 60 years old, tidy, practical, and deeply committed to the appearance of not being committed to anything in particular. She makes tea, she straightens cushions, she notices. She has the energy of a woman who has decided that witnessing things carefully is a form of service, and she is not entirely wrong about that. A housekeeper who reports to your psychiatrist is basically a Nest camera with a cardigan. Dr. Ralph Greenson has, at this point, become something closer to a daily fixture than a clinician. He visits most evenings. He sits with you. He talks to Eunice in the mornings, which is a thing psychiatrists do not typically do, at least not with the housekeeper. Greenson keeps a key to your front door. Eunice keeps her ear on the hallway. Between the two of them, someone always knows whether your light is on, whether you've taken the chloral hydrate, whether the door to your room is shut. Some evenings the front door opens without a knock. Greenson, letting himself in with the key on his ring. It's your house. You picked the tiles. You sourced the fountain. You hung the white linen curtains yourself, and yet the door is never quite closed to the people who are, in their various ways, managing you. Eunice sleeps down the hall. The cabinet holds its mismatched bottles. The house is warm. The house is not private. Here, in the hours that belong to you, you sleep late when the sleeping pills let you. You play Sinatra records in the evenings. There is a particular track you return to, the way you return to the fountain in the courtyard. You take long baths, which help, and then they help less, and then you take them anyway. You drink Dom Perignon, sometimes before noon, which sounds decadent, and is also, practically speaking, self-medication with better branding. The chloral hydrate is for the nights when nothing else quiets the thing that won't quiet. Marilyn, the woman the public knows, large, luminous, slightly late to everything, lives several miles from here, somewhere out past the studio gates. In this house you are Norma Jean. You walk around without makeup. You talk to yourself a little. You keep the small red diary in a place Eunice may or may not know about because Eunice knows most things. You write down conversations you've had with people whose names, if written down, produce a kind of static electricity in the room. You've been told more than once that you know too much. You haven't been told what to do with that. The diary is the provisional answer. And so the days run. Eunice tidying, Greenson arriving, the fountain in the courtyard making its small, reasonable sound, the Sinatra record reaching the end of its side and needing to be turned over. Nobody turns it over immediately. There's always a few minutes of silence where the needle just sits. You've stopped minding the silence as much as you used to. That might be progress. It might be the chloral hydrate. It's genuinely hard to say. You see your psychiatrist almost daily, and somewhere along the way the appointment stops being a place you go and becomes a structure you live inside. He decides what helps you and what doesn't. He weighs in on your work, your friends, your medicine, your hours. When you can't sleep, he is the one called. When you fall apart, he is the one who arranges the pieces. It is meant to be treatment, and in some weeks it is, but in others it is simply the closest thing you have to a person who is always there. Dr. Ralph Greenson drives to 5th Helena Drive most afternoons. He is not a small presence. He is a Freudian-trained analyst from UCLA with a full practice, a family, and a house of his own 3 miles away in Santa Monica, and yet here he is again, sitting in your white living room, asking how you slept. The visits run long, sometimes 2 hours. Sometimes he stays for dinner. His family meets you, you meet his family. The lines between patient and household guest become, professionally speaking, a little soft. Open the bathroom cabinet and the arithmetic of all this care lines up on a single shelf. It holds bottles from at least 3 different doctors, and those doctors are not, as far as anyone can tell, comparing notes with each other. Greenson prescribes. Doctor. Hyman Engelberg prescribes. Others contribute. The cabinet holds chloral hydrate for sleep and Nembutal for sleep and various other things for various other occasions. It is a collaborative project. Nobody is running point. The chloral hydrate is a sedative with a bitter chemical smell that clings to a room the way smoke does. The officers who arrive at the house in the early hours of August 5th will notice it immediately, before they notice much else. It works until it doesn't, and then the dose goes up, and then it works again for a while. Your insomnia has been documented, discussed, and medicated since at least the mid-1950s, which means by 1962 it is less a symptom and more a permanent resident of the household. It has its own drawer. Greenson's concern about your isolation is genuine. That much seems clear. He installs Eunice Murray partly because he worries about what happens in the hours between his visits. Murray reports back. On what exactly is a matter of some disagreement, depending on who you ask and when. But the shape of the arrangement is clear enough. Greenson is managing you the way an air traffic controller manages a runway. Constant contact, careful adjustments, one eye on the weather. Meanwhile, you keep the small red diary. Greenson has seen it. He mentions it afterward, to others, which is its own kind of telling. What exactly is in it? Conversations, names, dates, things said in rooms that weren't supposed to travel. Nobody knows now, because the diary is gone and has stayed gone. A diary is a private document in the way that a window is a private room. Not quite. A housekeeper named Lupe comes on Tuesdays. She moves through the kitchen efficiently, ignores the Dom Perignon on the counter with the professionalism of someone who has learned that some details simply belong to the house. She wipes down the Mexican tiles without comment. The tiles do not comment back, which is the kind of relationship you want with your flooring. The daily sessions with Greenson cost money. Everything costs money. The Brentwood house costs money. The medicine costs money. The companion monitor sleeping down the hall costs money. You are the top female box office draw of the decade, and you are spending faster than the films can pay, which is an achievement of its own kind. The estate you'll leave behind, about $92,000, a fraction of what the rhinestone gown alone would fetch at auction decades later, suggests that none of this came cheap. Some afternoons after Greenson leaves, the house goes quiet. The tile fountain in the courtyard runs. A Frank Sinatra record plays from somewhere inside, the sound moving through the rooms the way water does, filling whatever shape it finds. The needle reaches the end of the side and stays there, ticking faintly against the label. Down the hall, Eunice does not get up to turn it. The fountain in the courtyard keeps running, patient and indifferent, the way it has run since the morning you chose it in Tijuana. You spend evenings at a house on the sand in Santa Monica that functions, unofficially, as the Kennedy family's Western office. It belongs to the man who married into the family and brokers all the meetings, and the rules there are the same as the compounds. Know which room is which, know which conversations you can be present for. The Attorney General comes through when his work brings him to California, and his work brings him to California often. You are sometimes there when he is. The house keeps no guest book, on purpose. Peter Lawford has been running this operation since 1954, when he married Patricia Kennedy and immediately became the most useful person at any party in Los Angeles. His job, as far as anyone can tell, is to make introductions look accidental. He does this with a martini in one hand and the genuine conviction that none of it is his fault. He is the hinge on which the whole arrangement turns, and like most hinges, Nobody particularly thinks about him until something stops moving. The beach house is about 8 miles from your Brentwood home. Close enough to call easy, far enough to call casual. Inside the house, on an evening when someone important is present, everyone sorts into two groups. There are people who know what's happening in that room, and there are people who are decorative, and the trick of the beach house is that it's never obvious which category you're in. A man named Danny Schwartz tends bar and has a memory for faces and a very poor memory for names when later asked directly. He hands you something cold. He doesn't look up when the door opens again. The Attorney General is different from his brother in ways that are immediately physical. Robert Kennedy is compact and restless, like a person who has somewhere else to be at all times, even when he's standing still. He runs the Justice Department the way someone runs a personal grudge. In early 1962, that grudge is pointed squarely at Sam Giancana, whose phone lines RFK's office is tapping, whose associates are being subpoenaed on a schedule that suggests the paperwork is never going to end. Sam Giancana is also, at that same moment, on the CIA's payroll as part of an operation to assassinate Fidel Castro, which is a coordination problem nobody in the government appears to have flagged as awkward. You know Giancana's name. Most people who move through this world do. Robert Kennedy and Sam Giancana are supposed to be kept apart, and the beach house briefly, conveniently, keeps them within the same few rooms. The rules aren't written because writing them down would constitute a document, and documents have a way of surviving the people who made them. You understand this without being told. No one explains the arrangement. You learn it from the silences. The small red diary back in Brentwood, the one Greenson has seen and said nothing useful about, understands it too. In its way, names and dates and conversations recorded in your handwriting, sitting in a drawer that doesn't lock. Lawford will later say your last phone call to him on August 4th ended with you telling him to say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to the president, and say goodbye to yourself, because you're a nice guy. He will say this to several people, in several versions, over many years. The versions don't contradict each other so much as they breathe differently each time. He is, in his way, a very faithful witness to himself. For now, though, it's an earlier evening. The ocean outside does what the ocean does, which is to be indifferent, restless, and somehow still calming. You sit in a room full of people who are very good at acting like nothing is happening, which is a skill you also have, and which is possibly why you keep ending up in these rooms. The house keeps no guest book. The sand outside keeps no record either. That's the arrangement. You keep a diary, a small red one, and into it you copy the things powerful men say when they think the only audience is you. You don't do it to threaten anyone. You do it because your memory is your own, and the men in your life have a habit of editing the past once it stops flattering them. The habit makes a certain kind of person nervous. At least 2 men will eventually read that book. After your death, nobody will ever find it again, which tells you something about how nervous it made them. Dr. Ralph Greenson sees it. He mentions it, later, carefully, in the way a man mentions something he wishes he hadn't seen. Eunice Murray, installed in your Brentwood house by Greenson himself, has opinions about the book too, or at least opinions about where it is kept. The house has a white bedroom with white linen curtains, and a tile fountain in the courtyard that you find calming, and the diary lives somewhere in that quiet geography, somewhere specific. Greenson knows where. The book knows he knows. What's in it is not the names. The names are their own problem, but the texture of it. You've been in rooms where the Attorney General of the United States discussed Sam Giancana. You've been in rooms where the President of the United States discussed things that weren't for rooms. You write it down the way a court reporter writes it down. Flatly, in sequence, with the date at the top. The diary isn't analysis. It's a transcript. The brass clasp clicks shut over everything you have written, and in that instant the book stops being a diary. Your phone records from August 4th are already gone by now. Removed, not misfiled, not lost. The phone records are gone. The diary is gone. Marta, a research assistant at the DA's office during the 1982 reinvestigation, reportedly spent 3 weeks cross-referencing witness statements with property inventories from the Brentwood house. She marks the diary absent in the inventory log and draws a small circle around the notation, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of a shrug. 50,000 pages, no diary. The circle stays in the file. The review concludes, carefully, that the death is consistent with suicide. The timeline questions left unanswered. It notes the missing phone records. It doesn't speculate about the diary. Speculation isn't in the mandate. The diary is outside the mandate. What you actually wrote in it, the conversations, the dates, the names attached to specific statements, stays gone. What remains is the fact that two men read it, and neither one ever described its contents to anyone on record. Joe DiMaggio sends roses to your crypt 3 times a week for 20 years. He never explains this publicly. He doesn't write it down. The florist knows the order by heart. The roses arrive. They don't explain anything either. They just show up, red, faithful, and silent, on schedule, doing their one thing without comment. You drink champagne, the expensive kind, and you don't always wait for an occasion or even for lunch. A glass in the morning takes the edge off the night that wouldn't end. It is treated in your house as ordinary, a domestic detail, like coffee, like the radio. You tell yourself it is a small luxury and not a small problem, and most days the difference between those two things is hard to locate. The bottle does not judge you. It is, in fact, the only thing in the house that has nothing to say. The medicine cabinet does have something to say. It says it quietly in the language of prescription labels, 3 of them, from 3 different doctors, none of whom appear to have met. One name for the chloral hydrate, a different name for the Nembutal, a third name, on a smaller bottle, for something to help with mornings. The cabinet holds this arrangement with the calm of a filing system that has arrived at a very workable solution. You are the workable solution. Eunice Murray moves through the house on the same schedule every day. She fills the kettle. She sets things on counters. She is there in the way that certain furniture is there, present, legible, not quite what she appears to be. Dr. Greenson placed her in the house because you were alone too much. This is the fix for being alone too much. A woman who reports back. She straightens a dish towel with the thoroughness of someone straightening a dish towel while listening very carefully. Let's talk about the house itself. It's on 5th Helena Drive in Brentwood, bought in January 1962 for $75,000, the first house you have ever owned. The tiles are Mexican, sourced on a Tijuana trip, and they smell faintly of something earthy and specific. Not quite clay, not quite dust, something between the two that the California air never fully absorbs. There's a tile fountain in the courtyard. You find it calming. The fountain has no opinion about chloral hydrate or about who called last night or about what time it is. The fountain is, in this respect, a peer of the champagne. The swimming pool is unheated, and you rarely use it. It sits in the backyard looking available. This is what an unheated pool does. It waits. In the evenings, Frank Sinatra plays on the record player, not because anyone put him on deliberately, but because he is the record that ends up on. The bedroom is white. The room is bright, quiet, and deceptively peaceful. White walls, white linen curtains that move when the window is cracked, white bedding that photographs as pure and serene, and is neither of those things by 3 in the morning when the Nembutal hasn't worked, and the champagne is gone, and the phone is there. The phone. It knows things the diary doesn't. Calls logged, calls unlogged, calls that go long enough that whoever is on the other end must be sitting down somewhere comfortable. On August 4th, you make a number of them. The records exist, and then shortly afterward they don't, removed from Pacific Telephone by persons who are not identified in any subsequent account. The phone company finds this unremarkable enough not to comment on. The 1982 reinvestigation finds it remarkable enough to note and inconclusive enough to leave there. Dr. Greenson arrives most afternoons. He is your psychiatrist, your confidant, and, in some arrangement that doesn't have a clean professional name, your general overseer. He has read the Red Diary. He knows what's in it. He does not publish his findings. He sits across from you in the White Room and asks how you slept, which is either a clinical question or a polite one, and the answer is the same either way. Some mornings there is Mexican hot chocolate, dark, grainy, not quite sweet, and that, combined with the fountain and the tile smell and the curtains moving, almost produces the sensation of a life that is settled. Almost. You have a house. You have a fountain. You have a medicine cabinet with an innovative staffing model and a champagne supply that replenishes without being discussed. By the standards of Brentwood in 1962, this is a person who is doing fine. The pool sits in the backyard, still unheated, still waiting. You spend a July afternoon on a beach being photographed, and the photographer notices something you stopped noticing years ago. You can become luminous the instant the camera is raised, and you can collapse back into something frightened and small the moment it lowers. On, off, on, off. It is a skill, and like all your skills, it is also a tell. These will be among the last pictures taken of you, though of course nobody on that beach knows it yet. You give the camera exactly what it came for, then you give the rest of yourself to no one. The photographer is George Barris, and he's shooting for Cosmopolitan on a stretch of Santa Monica Beach in July 1962. He hands you a fur stole even though it's warm. You wrap it around yourself and tip your face toward the water like you've been doing this for 30 years, which is approximately how long it feels. In some of the frames you are incandescent. In others you look like someone who has just remembered where they are. Barris keeps shooting. The camera doesn't know the difference, and in a photograph, the difference doesn't matter anyway. Barris lifts the camera and your chin comes up, your shoulders drop, your mouth softens into the half smile that reads as available and untouchable at once. You've been manufacturing that look since 1952, when they started printing your face on everything. Not your face, the face. The one that arrives on cue, bright, practiced, and weightless, at precisely the angle the lens wants. It takes the same concentration as a stage performance, except the stage is wherever the camera points and the curtain never closes all the way. By 1962, you've done it so often, it happens in your body before your mind decides anything. Raise the camera. You arrive, lower it, you leave. Barris calls it magic. You call it Tuesday. Meanwhile, the studio has already filed the paperwork. 20th Century Fox terminated your contract in June, citing absences from Something's Got to Give. And yes, one of the cited absences was the night you sang Happy Birthday to the President in a gown that had to be stitched directly onto your body. The film had a budget. You had commitments. The studio's position is that these were not the same commitment, and the studio is, technically, correct. The film will eventually be completed by someone else. The dress will sell for $4.8 million in 2016. Nobody will make a documentary about the film. A production assistant named Clyde Weems packs your things from the studio dressing room into 3 cardboard boxes, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who has been told to be fast and quiet about it. He stacks the boxes near the door, adjusts the top one so it doesn't tip, and does not make eye contact with any of the mirrors. The mirrors don't require it. They already know. Back on the beach, Barris takes a break and you sit on a sand dune wrapped in the fur stole and drink something warm from a paper cup. The ocean is doing its usual thing. You watch it without appearing to watch anything. You've become good at that too, at directing your gaze outward while whatever is actually happening stays somewhere considerably further in. The fur stole is itchy. You adjust it. The camera isn't raised. You don't arrive. These photographs will be published the following year under the title The Last Sitting, which is the kind of title only comprehensible in retrospect. In them, you are alternately the most alive person in any room and someone who is quietly left without moving. You've just been better, in some seasons, at keeping the second one from reaching the surface while the first one was needed. The small red diary is at the Brentwood house. You've been writing in it for months. What's in it stays in it, for now. 2 people will eventually read it. Neither of them will say where it went afterward. You spend the evening of August 4th on the telephone, which is, by now, where most of your relationships actually live. There are calls in and calls out, some of them slurred, some of them clear, all of them later argued over by people who weren't on the line. The man who brokers everything talks to you and says afterward that you sounded far away. You tell him to say goodbye to a list of people which he will repeat for the rest of his life. The phone, your most faithful companion, takes its last messages. Peter Lawford is the man who brokers everything. He's at his Santa Monica house, the one with the ocean view he uses to make himself seem more central than he is, which is a skill he's been developing for a decade. He calls you somewhere between 7 and 7:30. The exact time is disputed. Lawford is one of those people whose recollections sharpen considerably after everyone else involved stops being available to contradict them. He says, "You sound strange." He says you say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to the president, and say goodbye to yourself, because you're a nice guy. He says he tries to call back and can't get through. This is the part of the story where the phone itself becomes a character, and it plays the role badly. Too slow, too late, cord tangled, somewhere between the bedroom and whatever comes next. Phone records exist right up until they don't. The call logs from August 4th, already gone by then, were never recovered, retrieved, purposefully, by someone who apparently found them more useful as an absence than as a document. The phone has opinions about this. The phone isn't talking. Eunice Murray is in the house with you, Doctor. Greenson placed her there over concern for your isolation, which is a polite way of saying you were being watched by someone whose job title was housekeeper but whose actual function was considerably more complicated. Murray's account of the night shifts several times over the years. What time she noticed the light under your door, what time she called Greenson, what time Greenson called the police. The times move. Not dramatically, just enough to matter. What stays, instead, is the sound of its second hand, your voice described by other people, far away, slow, saying goodbye. Everyone who heard you that night will spend years telling it slightly differently. None of them recorded it. You were, as usual, the only reliable witness, and you are no longer available for comment. Helicopter pilot Lynn Franklin and Sergeant Clemens both place Robert Kennedy in the neighborhood that evening. Nobody confirms this officially. Lawford later says various things in various interviews across various decades, each version slightly adjusted for the interviewer's sympathies. He is, until his death in 1984, the last person who claims to know what you said, and he recites those goodbye lines like a man who has decided the recitation is the only useful thing left he can do with the information. The small red diary is not in the house when investigators arrive. Greenson had seen it. Someone else had seen it. It held things you'd been told in rooms you were not supposed to remember. Its whereabouts remain, like the phone records, officially unresolved. Two objects that knew too much, both of them gone before anyone thought to ask where they went. You make those calls on a phone line, and a phone line, in 1962, keeps a record. Someone wants that record. In the days after your death, the list of every number you dialed on your last full day is quietly removed from the telephone company's offices and never seen again. A private investigator will spend decades looking for it. It does not turn up. There is no drama to how it vanishes, no break-in, no chase, just paperwork that exists one week and doesn't the next, the way important paperwork sometimes learns to do. The 1982 Los Angeles District Attorney's Review goes through more than 50,000 pages. 50,000. That's not a file. That's a personality. The county reads everything, cross-references everything, interviews people who were there, and people who heard from people who were there, and at the end of it concludes that the death is consistent with suicide and that the timeline has questions it cannot answer. Neither the phone records nor the small red diary are among the 50,000 pages. The boxes sit careful, exhaustive, and hollow at the center, with the two documents that would matter most missing from the stack. Private investigator Milo Spiriglio documents the removal of the phone records, a visitor, unidentified, who stops by the telephone company offices in the days after your death and leaves with something. No warrant mentioned, no formal request on record. The phone company cooperates with this the way a very tired front desk clerk cooperates with anyone who seems like they know where they're going. He just walked in. He just walked out. The record of your last day walks with him. What's left is a short list. There's your medicine cabinet, with its mismatched bottles, less a medical team than several separate guesses running in parallel. There's Eunice Murray, whose account of the evening shifts in ways she never fully explains. There's Sergeant Jack Clemens, the first officer on the scene, who left convinced the room had been tidied before he arrived and said so for the rest of his life. The room told him something. The people in it told him something else. Ralph Greenson arrives. He is your psychiatrist and he has read the red diary. The diary is not at the house when investigators catalogue the scene, or if it is, it doesn't make it into the catalogue. Greenson, when asked about it later, does not produce it. A diary in which a woman wrote down things she heard from powerful men, in her own hand, in a small red book, last seen in the possession of the people with the most reason to lose it. The diary has no comment on this. It simply isn't there. Marlene, a neighbour 3 houses down on 5th Helena Drive, tells a reporter years later that she heard voices that evening, not the words, just the register of voices, more than one, urgent. She thought it was the television. The television, as it turns out, was not on. This goes into the file at J. Edgar Hoover is no longer alive to manage, and it stays there, contributing its small weight to a conclusion already written. Consistent with suicide, timeline unclear. What the records leave you with is a woman who made phone calls on her last full day, spoke to people whose names you can partly reconstruct from other sources, and whose last complete act of documentation was erased by someone who understood that the calls mattered. Someone walked in and removed exactly the pages that would have spoken. What's left speaks the way the rest of this story has always spoken, not in headlines, not in courtrooms, but in the roses DiMaggio sent to her crypt 3 times a week for 20 years, red, faithful, and silent, and in the thing he never once said publicly about how she died. You are gone by the time the first policeman arrives, and from his point of view almost nothing about the scene adds up. He notes the hour, the people already present, the rigidity of the timeline he's being handed. The story he is told and the things he is looking at do not quite fit in the same room. He says so for years afterward to anyone who asks. He is the first person to do his job at the end of your life, and the first to come away feeling that his job had been arranged for him in advance. His name is Sgeety, Jack Clemens, and he arrives at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive at approximately 4:25 inches the morning. The door opens before he reaches it. Eunice Murray is in the process of doing laundry. The washing machine is running. It is 4:15 in the morning and the washing machine is running, which is a detail Clemens files away and does not let go of. The body is on the bed, face down, arms at her sides, a position, Clemens will later note, that isn't the common posture of someone who has taken a large quantity of barbiturates and drifted off alone. People who die that way tend to arrange themselves the way people do when they fall asleep, which is to say, messily, not like a display. Let's talk about the medicine cabinet. It holds bottles from at least 3 different prescribing physicians, none of whom appear to have been speaking to the others. Dr. Hyman Engelberg, Dr. Ralph Greenson. The prescriptions overlap and stack in the way that suggests no single person had the whole picture, which is a dangerous thing when the picture involves chloral hydrate and nembutal and the sharp, bitter chemical smell that officers notice the moment they step into the room. The smell is sharp, bitter, and undeniable. It makes one thing plain. It doesn't make anything else plain. Clemens asks his questions. He is told the body was discovered around midnight or shortly after. He is told doctor. Greenson was called, then doctor. Engelberg, then the police. He is given a sequence. He stands in the room and looks at the sequence, and the sequence has the texture of something rehearsed. Not wrong necessarily, but too smooth. The way a story gets when it's been said aloud a few times before the audience it was meant for finally walks in. Antoinette Giancana, whose father ran Chicago while the Justice Department tried to put him in a cell, once described how a room can tell you things the people in it won't. Clemens is not Antoinette Giancana. He is a police sergeant at a residential address in Brentwood at 4:30 inches the morning. But he understands rooms. He writes down what the room is saying. What the room is saying and what the people in the room are saying are not the same document. He leaves. He tells his supervisors. He tells them the timeline has problems. He tells them the scene has problems. He becomes someone who says this for the rest of his life, in interviews, in sworn statements, in conversations that get recorded and filed and occasionally cited and generally not acted upon. He is not a conspiracy theorist. He is a man who arrived at a scene and noticed that the scene had been tidied before he got there. The laundry is the part he always comes back to. The laundry running at 4 a.m., patient and domestic, like someone finishing a task they'd started hours earlier. The 1982 DA Review will eventually read his account alongside 50,000 other pages. It will note the timeline inconsistencies. It will not resolve them. The phone records that might have mapped the last hours of August 4th are already gone by then, folded into the pile of things that are known to have happened but cannot be proved. Clemens is still alive when those findings are published. He reads them. He has the expression, in interviews from that period, of a man who expected nothing different and received exactly that. You are the most famous woman in the world, and you die worth less than a decent house. The biggest female box office draw of the decade leaves behind, in cash and belongings, a figure that would barely impress a mid-level executive. Your will, signed the year before, hands most of it to your acting teacher. The studio system paid you in fame, which does not transfer to an estate and cannot be left to anyone. The numbers, read aloud, sound like a clerical error. They are not. They are simply what they decided you were worth. The figure is $92,624. That is the total, not $92,624 and a portfolio. Not 92,000, $624 and some hidden accounts. Just $92,624, a wardrobe and a house you'd bought 8 months earlier for $75,000 and hadn't finished paying for. The Brentwood house still smelled of the Mexican tiles you'd hauled back from Tijuana and a mosaic near the entrance that the previous owners wouldn't have chosen. It was yours in the way anything is yours when the bank is involved. Mostly yours, pending. Let's talk about the will. You signed it on March 14, 1961, in a mood of apparent organizational optimism. Lee Strasberg, your acting teacher at the Actors Studio, receives the bulk of the estate. Lee Strasberg, who did not write the films, did not negotiate the contracts, did not sit under the lights. Lee Strasberg, who taught you to feel things for a camera that was already plenty interested in your face. He gets the clothes, the personal effects, and whatever money remains. Your psychiatrist doctor, Ralph Greenson, gets a small amount. Your mother's care is provided for. Joe DiMaggio is not in the will. DiMaggio, who would go on to have red roses delivered to your crypt 3 times a week for 20 years, gets nothing in writing. He shows up anyway. He arranges the funeral. He handles the logistics of the thing with the focused competence of a man who has nowhere else to put the grief. Meanwhile, the rhinestone gown you wore to Madison Square Garden, the one with 2,500 hand-stitched rhinestones, the one you were sewn into backstage by a woman with a needle and considerable patience, that gown sells at auction in 1999 for $1.26 million, then again in 2016 for $4.81 million, then again around 2024 for approximately $3.5 million. A single dress out-earned, across 3 sales, every paycheck the studio ever cut you. It is, in a very specific way, a better investment than being you. Miguel, an estate attorney who presumably had seen some things, reads the asset list twice, turns to the second page, and finds no second page. He flips back to the contract and runs a finger down to one tidy paragraph wedged between the wardrobe allowance and the morality provision. The clause that hands your image, your face, your name, your likeness, to the studio in perpetuity. He underlines it. The studio keeps earning on you for decades. The underlined sentence is the reason, sitting there in patient, loyally, immovable type. Here are the flat facts. Some Like It Hot grossed many millions of dollars. Your fee for it was approximately $100,000. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was a box office event. Bus Stop was a box office event. The returns went to whoever owned the distribution rights, the theatre chains, and the licensing agreements, which was never you. The number you got was the number printed in the contract, and the contract was signed long before anyone counted the receipts, and then the studio fired you. Officially, the cause listed was failure to report to the set of Something's Got to Give. Partially also the birthday gala. And 20th Century Fox, having built the biggest female star of the decade, terminated your contract in June 1962, 2 months before she died, partly for showing up to sing at a party. The party had 15,000 people in it. The president was there. It didn't matter. You were in breach. The breach was documented. The documentation was filed. What you leave behind, in the end, is the furniture of a life arranged by other people. The white bedroom with white linen curtains, the unheated swimming pool you rarely used, a small red diary that at least 2 people read before it disappeared entirely, a medicine cabinet that answered to no single doctor, and a number, $92,624, that the probate court entered into the record without comment, because the probate court does not do commentary. It just does numbers. The number was the number. It stays that way. You are buried, and the ball player you were married to for 9 months arranges all of it, quietly, keeping the crowd and the cameras as far back as he can. Then he does the thing that outlasts the funeral. 3 times a week, for 20 years, red roses are delivered to your crypt. He gives no interviews about it. He explains it to no one. It is the longest, steadiest relationship of your life, and it begins the week after your life ends. Grief, it turns out, can keep a delivery schedule better than most people keep a promise. DiMaggio bars over 600 people from the funeral, by name. The Kennedys are on that list. Peter Lawford is on that list. Frank Sinatra is on that list. The men who move through your life like weather, loud, fast, and gone before you could ask them to stay, do not get a chair at the graveside. DiMaggio, who has been out of your life officially for 8 years, gets every chair. He stands where the others don't. He says nothing in public. The silence is the statement. The crypt is at Westwood Memorial Park, which is smaller than you'd expect for the most photographed woman in America. It is a quiet, flat place, easy to miss from the street, tucked behind a hotel, Corridor C, Space 24. The roses arrive so regularly that the groundskeepers factor them into the week. Not if. When. A florist in Burbank keeps the standing order for 2 decades, which makes DiMaggio's grief the most logistically consistent thing happening in Burbank from 1962 to 1982. Now, let's talk about the others. JFK is assassinated in Dallas on November 22, 1963, 15 months after you die. RFK is shot at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles on June 5, 1968, and dies the following morning. The Ambassador is roughly 8 miles from your Brentwood house at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive. The distance between that house and every major event in this story keeps turning out to be very small. The city is large. The circles were not. A journalist named Anthony Summers spends years on a biography. Norman Mailer publishes one in 1973, a book about you that is mostly about Norman Mailer. Gloria Steinem writes a more careful one. Joyce Carol Oates turns your life into a novel that is 800 pages long and wins awards. Everyone, it turns out, has a theory. The theories multiply because the facts stop too early and leave a large Monroe-shaped space where explanation should be. A hotel attendant named Ramon, working Corridor C every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday morning, starts his rounds by checking the roses first, not because anyone told him to, but because they're always there and he's not sure what it would mean if they weren't. He adjusts the vase with both hands, the way you'd set something down that cost more than you meant to spend. Then he moves on. The standing order runs until 1982. DiMaggio stops it the year he is told he is dying. He cancels it himself. You leave behind a small red diary that at least 2 people claim to have seen and no one has produced. You leave behind a medicine cabinet of mismatched bottles. You leave behind a performance, the garden, the gown, the song, that the culture has been rewinding ever since, looking for something in your face that tells it what it needs to know. The face doesn't answer. It never did. That was, in some ways, the whole arrangement. The roses keep coming, the interviews don't. He had 20 years to change his mind, and he didn't. You become, 2 decades after your death, a stack of 50,000 pages on a district attorney's desk. The county decides to look again at how you died, and looking again means documents, boxes of them, read by people who never met you, searching for the one fact that was never written down. They finish the review and conclude that the circumstances are consistent with what was always said. They also concede the timeline never fully closed. It is the most thorough anyone ever was about you, and it arrives 20 years too late to ask you anything. The 1982 Los Angeles DA reinvestigation is not a trial. There is no defendant. There is no new witness standing in a hallway with something to confess. There are 50,000 pages of prior record, interview transcripts, toxicology reports, and investigative notes, and somewhere inside all of it, a gap where the phone records used to be. The records from August 4th, your last full day, were removed from the phone company's files shortly after your death. A private investigator named Milo Spiriglio documented the removal. The records themselves were not found. The investigation notes the absence. Then it moves on, the way bureaucracies always move on from the thing they cannot explain. Let's talk about the medicine cabinet. It doesn't testify in 1982, but its inventory matters. A cabinet that answered to no single doctor, chloral hydrate from one, Nembutal from another. The LAPD officers who arrived at the Brentwood house in the early hours of August 5th noticed the smell before they noticed anything else. Sharp, chemical, and unmistakable, the kind of smell that has a very specific name and a very specific source. Doctor. Greenson is already there. Eunice Murray is already there. The sequence of phone calls and arrivals that night runs in a different order depending on who you ask, and the 1982 review cannot reconcile them. The review calls this a timeline question. It is, in its way, a very careful phrase for something no one could straighten out. A detective on the 1982 review Fields. Part of it. He interviews witnesses who were interviewed in 1962 and finds that memories have not improved with age. This is the expected result. What is unexpected is how many small details shifted, not dramatically, not in ways that suggest conspiracy so much as in ways that suggest 20 years of living with a version of events and gradually mistaking the version for the memory. A coroner's assistant named Lionel Grandison said in 1962 that he signed the death certificate under pressure and later disputed the account. In 1982, his recollection is part of the record. It doesn't change the conclusion. The conclusion was always going to be consistent with what was always said. Investigator Thomas Noguchi performed the original autopsy and signed off on probable suicide by acute barbiturate poisoning. 20 years on, he tells the review that certain tissue samples that should have been preserved were not. Those samples would have allowed a more precise reconstruction of the timeline. In 1962, nobody preserved them because nobody expected to be relitigating a Tuesday night 2 decades into the future. It is a reasonable failure. It is still a failure. The box those samples should be sitting in is somewhere in a county storage system, empty, misfiled, or simply gone, which is the bureaucratic version of all three being the same answer. Meanwhile, the phone records stay missing. The records did not reappear. The phone company had no explanation that satisfied anyone. This is the part of the story that sits at the bottom of the 50,000 pages like a stone the size of a phone bill. There is a record stating the records were removed. The records themselves are not in evidence. A document confirms the absence of the documents, which is the kind of sentence that makes a filing cabinet sweat. The gap is documented. The gap remains. The DA's office closes the review. The conclusion is consistent. The timeline has questions. The file is thick enough to stop a door. You are, at this point, 20 years gone, and still the most documented private person in that building. You discover, from wherever the dead discover such things, that you have become an industry. The books begin almost immediately and never really stop. The speculative ones, the serious ones, the sympathetic ones, the ones adapted into films decades on. Each writer arrives certain they have found the real you, and each one leaves behind another version for the next writer to correct. You spent your whole life being assembled every morning by other people. It turns out that didn't end. It just moved to the printing presses, where it could run without you. Norman Mailer publishes his in 1973. It's a biography he wrote without interviewing anyone close to you, based largely on other books, some photographs, and what appears to be an extremely confident internal sense of who you were. He wins a National Book Award for it. The book contains a chapter about your sexuality that you would have found remarkable, in the sense that remarkable is a word that covers a wide range of reactions, most of them not complimentary. Gloria Steinem's version arrives in 1986. It's gentler. It frames you as a woman crushed by the same culture that worshipped you, which is accurate, and it sells well, and it places you firmly inside the feminist conversation of that decade, whether you would have chosen that or not. You did not have opinions about the 1980s, nobody asked. Anthony Summers arrives with sources. Actual interviews. Hundreds of them. People who knew you, worked alongside you, prescribed your medications, lived in your house, drove you places, answered your phone. His book, published in 1985, is the one the researchers cite. It is also the one that documents carefully and without flourish the mismatched bottles in your medicine cabinet, each prescriber working from a partial picture. The picture, taken together, not good. Joyce Carol Oates writes a novel. It's called Blonde. It's 738 pages. She invents interior monologue, dreams, and scenes from your childhood in a voice meant to approximate yours. It's nominated for the Pulitzer. The novel is not about you. It's about a character called Norma Jean, who becomes a character called the Blonde, which is a distinction Oates finds meaningful and critics argue about for 20 years. You are, at this point, functioning as literary raw material, which is a kind of fame very few people achieve and nobody asks for. A dress outlives the woman. The gown from Madison Square Garden, Jean-Louis, flesh-toned soufflé, 2,500 rhinestones, hand-stitched one at a time, goes to auction in 1999. It sells for $1.26 million. This is already more than your total estate. It goes to auction again in 2016. It sells for $4.81 million. It goes to auction a third time in 2024 and settles around $3.5 million. The dress has now been sold 3 times for a cumulative sum that would have bought you roughly 40 Brentwood houses, and at no point during any of this did you receive a check. The dress outperformed you financially. The dress has a better agent than you did. Ripley, from that film you'd have liked, could not have invented it. Meanwhile, a woman named Eunice Murray, who lived with you in those last months, who called Dr. Greenson the night you died, who gave at least 3 different versions of the evening's timeline to investigators, writes a book in 1975. It's called Marilyn, The Last Months. She revises her account in a 1985 BBC documentary, mentioning, almost in passing, details she hadn't mentioned before. Nobody explains the gap. Eunice Murray is 92 years old when she gives that interview, and appears entirely untroubled by the revision. The timeline adjusts itself. Nobody recovers the phone records. Joe DiMaggio does not write a book. He gives almost no interviews. He has red roses delivered to your crypt at Westwood 3 times a week, without announcement, without press, for 20 years, which is a form of grief so specific and so sustained that it makes every book about you feel briefly inadequate. He does this until he dies in 1999. The roses stop, the books don't. And so here we are at the end of the night. You woke up as the most photographed woman in America and spent the day being assembled, scheduled, and quietly filed. You sang 11 words to a president in a dress you had to be sewn into. You sat in Frank Sinatra's compound while 3 conversations happened at once and none of them were the real one. You drank champagne before noon and called it a small luxury. You kept a little red book that 2 men read and nobody ever found. You counted the bottles in the medicine cabinet, and the medicine cabinet, as always, kept its own counsel. It was a lot for one life. It was a lot for one day. Most of the people in those rooms weren't villains. They were charming, useful, and standing a little too close to power, and those 3 things tend to arrive together. They called it glamour, because the better word hadn't been invented yet. You smiled at the right moments. You passed the bread. You went home. But you're not in any of those rooms now. Wherever you're listening from, whatever the clock says, whatever the day asked of you, none of it has to be carried into tonight. Thank you, genuinely, for spending these hours here with me. It's a strange, sad, oddly comforting story, and you stayed for the whole of it. So let the day go now. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let the room turn soft and dark and unremarkable around you. Let the breath slow until it's the only thing left on the schedule. You have a door that locks from the inside. No one is tapping your line tonight. The roses on the nightstand, if you have them, are just roses, red, ordinary, and asking nothing of you at all. The dress has already been sewn. You don't have to be anywhere until morning. Sleep well.